And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nick Frazier Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Frazier, as it says in the title. Today, I'm delving into a little bit of Nashville SC, some Preds, and I'm alongside my uncle here today, Michael. Call him Mike. He's co-hosting with me today, and we're going to delve into some of this Nashville SC. You know, soccer season's on the rise, and Michael, how we doing?
I'm good, Nick. How are you? What's shaking in Nashville today?
You know, nothing much. It's beautiful weather. It's about 80 plus degrees, and we're living the good life, I guess. We're about to talk a little bit of soccer, something we're both, formally cordial with. And I mean, MLS is not our strong point, but it's good quality soccer.
Absolutely. That game last night. Let me just tell you a quick story.
Go ahead.
As being an old man, I have an early bedtime, so keeping my eyes open for the first half, seeing Nashville FC down 2-0. To be honest, the next time I opened my eyes, it was 3-2. So I actually had to go back and rewind the game to see what had happened. But man, we'll get into it. But that's a pretty interesting game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were talking beforehand, not before the podcast, but yesterday before the game, we were watching the Coppa Italia and talking over the phone and so forth. And I told you, I said, when we talk about Nashville SC tomorrow, it's going to be either, 4-2 type game, a 2-0 type game, and sure enough, it was a 3-2 win for Nashville SC. And it's crazy how the trend has gone with these two clubs. It's a rivalry, and every time they've played, both teams have scored 2 goals. So it's crazy how that works, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's much like, say, Nashville and Columbus in hockey. It's the same thing. Teams create rivalries, and once those rivalries get a little bad blood in them, they always turn exciting every time they play. So good for Nashville, actually, to have a rival like Atlanta so close by.
To me, I have a rivalry of my own. I don't think it's really known, but Nashville SC versus Houston Dynamo, I call it the Lone Star Tri-Star rivalry. And a lot of people don't really realize that they've always given them a good battle, and it's never a clean matchup. It's always kind of dirty. But as for Atlanta United and Nashville SC, it's a very respected rivalry. And last night it kind of got sour for Atlanta United. And getting into the game here, Nashville SC started out with a 3-5-2, something that they normally don't run, surprisingly. And from my knowledge, it kind of shadows from like a 4-3-1-2 kind of, where they always run a 2-striker set when it's league play MLS. It's normally CJ Sapong and Hani Mukhtar up top. But this time it was Mukhtar and Ake Loba. And running the 3-5-2, you have Alex Muil, who is on the right side, and Daniel Lovitz, who is on the left side. And then you have, obviously, Anunga. And Hawkinson is someone I like a lot. He's a youngster that has a lot of upside. And then Davis sitting in that holding midfield spot with Romney, Zimmerman, and Maurer, and Willis in net for him. So getting into that lineup so far with the 3-5-2, I kind of knew that Nashville SC would let up a few goals. And it kind of showed in the first couple minutes. I think it was the 13th minute. Thiago Almada scored for Atlanta United. Just when he got to the byline, and you're just like, this is going in the middle of the box. And sure enough, he got to the byline and scored a quick one. And, obviously, you fell asleep early, and then you went back to watch it. What'd you kind of dissect from that kind of run there?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I feel like Walker Zimmerman, each half represented a different game for Walker. He was a step behind in the first half on both Atlanta United goals, in fact. I don't know if playing a 3-5-2 puts him in a more vulnerable position, but, he has a tendency to try and sneak forward, get in on the offense every now and then. But in both of the goals in the first half, he was a step behind, and it cost him.
Yeah, and you make a good point there if a 3-5-2 is like the right setting for this back line. Because, he's a 2-time MLS Defender of the Year, so, like, you're thinking, oh, we're good, we're set, like there's nothing to really worry about. But yeah, there is. And when you go off of a 3-5-2, your wingbacks are playing more into the midfielder role. I mean, we're familiar with Serie A. We're going to refer to it a lot because that's a league we we follow, I wouldn't say religiously, but quite frequently. And there's a specific team, Atalanta, that has a coach of Giampiero Gasparini that runs a 3-5-2. And they run it differently than a lot of people in the rest of the world. It's a different type of breed of 3-5-2. But for Nashville SC, it's a bit concerning to see a 3-5-2 when they play it, because Alex Moyle, to me, I don't think needs to be playing right mid. To me, he's a player that fills the position, he fills the spot, but when you saw him try and stop a winger on the attack or counterattack, he was in a blender. His feet were in a blender. You're like, oh my gosh, like it's basically 10 versus 11 here. Like, what do we do? You know?
Yeah, I agree. He didn't look comfortable last night for sure.
I'm not too sure where they need to put Moyle. I know he is more of a comfortable mid, like left or right mid, and I know that's kind of what you run in a 3-5-2, but I think more in a 4-back setting would be the right way to set this all up. And you know, Jack Maurer out of Indiana, I believe, the other center back next to Walker Zimmerman and Dave Romney, he is a young star that is developing well. You know, he was on loan last year, and the GM of Nashville SC, Mike Jacobs, he brought him back early off the loan and said, hey, because at the time they were low on injury depth and they needed center backs, and he stepped in perfectly fine, and he's made a really good transition from, you know, the lower leagues up to now. So I think he played a great game last night, but you make a great point about Walker Zimmerman. Where can you put Walker? Is it more the formation of the 3-5-2, or would it be more the fact that he's just, it takes him a little bit when there's a team that's high, fast pace and counterattacking like Atlanta United?
You know, I almost feel like he's put the burden on himself that he has to do more than everybody else. So he finds himself sneaking ahead maybe a little bit higher up the pitch, you know, especially when there's an opportunity to get in on offense. So, you know, I think him being obviously a U.S. national player as well, and him being the captain, I think he's just put a whole lot of responsibility on himself, and every now and then he gets himself in trouble trying to do a little too much.
Yeah, a little too much indeed. You know, I'm watching the highlights as we're speaking here, and the spacing from Nashville SC, it seemed a bit cluttered in the midfield. And I know a 3-5-2, you have 5 midfielders, but those wingbacks are kind of supposed to help out on defense a little bit. But as for the 3 midfielders, they looked a little discombobulated. They weren't really settled in. And I believe that was kind of majority of the first half for the Nashville SC. Just they were very discombobulated and didn't know what to do. Kind of playing leggy, almost like it's a second half type ball game in the first half.
Yeah, you know, when you jump into a different formation like that, man, it takes some time to get used to if it's not something you normally run. I mean, of course you can simulate it in practice, but when you get out there against, you know, first team players, you know, a team like Atlanta, it takes some time to kind of get everybody in the right position and understand how to move the ball. So I can understand why Nashville had somewhat of a hard time in the first half.
Yeah, and also adding on to your comment there that Nashville SC, normally some of these players like Brian Anunga and Davis in the midfield, those guys normally aren't starting from my knowledge. They have a few other players that start in regards to those positions in the midfield. So, you know, I saw that Hani Mukhtar obviously was up top, and like Ake Loba, for instance, he normally doesn't start up top. It's normally CJ Sapong and Mukhtar. So I don't know. I really think that the midfield was a bit lackluster. And like you said, you know, playing a new formation, you kind of have to get your feet under you. But as it showed for Nashville SC around the around the 50th minute, you had Hani Mukhtar score the penalty kick. Well, what'd you like out of Hani, Michael? What'd you like? Anything that stood out to you specifically?
Well, I'll tell you what I like about him is, you know, obviously he scores goals, but he's actually involved in, you know, a lot of different areas of play. If you look at CJ Sapong's goal in the 92nd minute, that was set up by a beautiful little touch that Mukhtar put on the ball in the box that is not going to show up in the scorecard. But he settled a ball that allowed Nashville to keep possession and ultimately led to the Sapong goal. So I just like the way he stays involved in the play, even when it's not necessarily a goal-scoring opportunity.
Yeah, and just as you're talking about that little CJ Sapong goal there, Tony, yesterday when we were on the phone, mentioned that Sapong reminds him a lot of like a role player of Mario Mandzukic. Would you agree to that, or is there a little bit of a different comparison?
No, I mean, I do think that's a pretty good comparison. Now, if they could get the production that Mario Mandzukic had for all these years in Italy, then Nashville will be golden. So let's keep our fingers crossed that that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and what other dynamic do you think Nashville SC needs to add on to this team if you haven't seen it already?
Well, I do think they need some midfield help, kind of what you pointed out earlier. And again, maybe it was the formation last night, but there is a little bit of disorganization sometimes. So I don't know. We'll see how the next few games play out. But I know they're playing Houston next, so we'll see what they look like against Houston. See if they kind of shape their game up.
Yeah, and let me just point out there that you also have Randall Leal, who is a very good midfielder / winger. He is one of those type of guys that kind of sends in the crosses, sends in the assist type deal when it comes to needing opportunities on goal. And that's something that a lot of Nashville SC fans didn't get to see last night, was not showcased. So as for the future games ahead in league play for the MLS, you might be seeing a lot more goals from Nashville SC. Currently on the books, on FanDuel Sportbook, DraftKings, all the above, the odds for Nashville SC to win the whole thing is plus 2,300 the last time I checked. So it's not too bad. Before the season, they were plus 1,100, so the odds have dropped into more plus money favor. What do you like about those odds, Michael? You think that's a good price to double down on if you haven't already?
Hey, it's worth throwing $10 on. You never know.
Yeah, good little $10, $230 return type deal.
I mean, in reality, if you look across MLS, there's certain teams that, from a talent standpoint, they're loaded because they've got the money. But if you look at true style of play right now, it's hard for me to say that this team or that team is going to dominate the league. It's not like England where I see Man City and Liverpool, head and shoulders above everybody else. So, why not put $10 on Nashville? You never know.
Exactly. For the listeners of the Nick Frazier Podcast, everybody knows during the fall I do a little sports show of, the NFP picks. Well, here's a little NFP picks in the spring / summertime. Go put a little $10 on Nashville SC at 2,300. You might get a good return. You never know. But carrying on here for Nashville SC, they won this first round matchup against Atlanta United in the Lamar Hunt Trophy tournament, the U.S. Open Cup. They go on to the round of 16, I believe. And if they win the whole thing, Michael, it could help them qualify for more worldwide tournaments, as in the FIFA Club World Cup, and also help them qualify for the CONCACAF Champions League.
That'd be pretty cool to see some of these international teams come to Nashville,
Yeah,
I would really enjoy if Nashville gets the opportunity to do those sort of tournaments and like that.
Yeah, it would be good for the organization, good for the fan base, good for the city, good all around, honestly. And I think it'd be something for fans to see as well, that they haven't been able to experience what a lot of European, soccer clubs that are very well versed in these high quality tournaments like the Champions League and so forth. When you have, North America Champions League, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and there's something else I want to talk about concerning soccer in general. After watching last night's game, Walker Zimmerman had a nice goal disallowed in the 79th minute due to offsides. We see calls across the entire globe, whether it's Italy, Germany, Spain, now it's the MLS, calls that are reviewed on VAR, and still it seems like we can't get the call right. So What exactly is the purpose of VAR if we can't hire folks to actually look at the screens and determine the correct calls? Because to me, that did not look like an offsides call on Zimmerman last night. What are your thoughts on all that?
I want to say last night was probably the worst I've ever seen, personally. I think in regards to VAR, we both know that the Italian Federation is trying to do what the NFL does and give coaches the allowed time to review VAR officiating and do like 2 challenges per game, first half and second half, which would be quite interesting. I think that would be a good dynamic. In regards to this game, though, Walker Zimmerman was not offsides. It was a clean, it was from a set piece. I'm not too sure, if they didn't really show the side angle either. And normally when you have a TV broadcast, they show you both angles, from behind and the side, and they didn't show the side. So I don't know. I think he was not offsides. I think the officiating last night was pretty horrendous, and I think they need to reevaluate some things with the VAR, because you're right that we keep seeing continuous calls being upheld when they're still wrong. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I really wish that, FIFA or whatever, the U.S. Soccer Federation can kind of, I don't know what they need to do to fix this type of protocol. I feel like at the end of the year, they need to look at the percentages of correct calls and non-correct calls and kind of base it off that. Whoever had the most conversion rate of correct calls, I think, should be on a tier system. The ones that had the better correct calls percentages all on the same staff, the referee staff, and referee a game together, or something along those lines. Maybe keep reevaluating referees and send them back to school or something. I don't know. Am I sounding in the right direction there?
I also think there needs to be some standardization of what, for instance, what is offsides, because, they throw VAR up and then next thing you know, there's a blue line, there's a red line. Oh, well, this guy's pinky toe was offsides. Oh, this guy's elbow was offsides. To me, it's very confusing. It seems to me like, I don't know why the arms would be considered offsides. If the arms are not part of, to me, it should be where the feet are, where the legs are. What do you score with? You don't score with your arms. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just know there's a problem, because the issues we saw last night in MLS, we saw the same thing in Italy yesterday in the Coppa Italia. Two potentially horrendous calls that cost Juventus potentially the Coppa Italia championship. So it's not just MLS, it's across the board, but I do think it's got to be addressed, and somehow there's got to be standardization.
Yeah, I'd have to agree there. And also the protocol with referees to officiate MLS games, I think they need to come from either, I don't know, other states, I guess the better way to put it, because when you go to other countries, they have, referees from that country, but a different region. And, over the years of watching European soccer, from our knowledge, is the Italian league has kind of had some sort of rigged officiating in the history of it all. There have been some, so they say allegedly. I mean, hey, so they say allegedly, but
I wouldn't, allegedly.
I wouldn't say the same thing here in the MLS. Hopefully not, but I think it should be looked into a little bit more, because there's some. It was almost like Nashville SC had the odds against them before the initial whistle of the game.
Well, I think what's important is, if you look at things from a World Cup standpoint, for instance, now U.S. officials are part of the draw for World Cup. So whether you're from the U.S. or you're from Belgium or you're from Japan, there's officials from all over the world officiating these large tournaments such as World Cup. So that's why I think standardization is really going to be so important.
Yeah, everybody's got to be on the same page for sure. And as speaking about the same pages here, I'm looking at the Nashville SC's page right now for this game last night, and the statistics are kind of crazy to look at, for the fact that Nashville SC had 3 goals and Atlanta had 2, but the time of possession it is completely different. I mean, with 42% with Nashville SC and 58% of Atlanta United, it reminds me a lot of Catenaccio in some sort of degree, just looking at it statistically. But when you look at the game itself and the highlights, it didn't look like that. And I think that's the trend in the MLS, is that when you look at the percentages of possession, you can throw that out the window. I think it's more of counterattack soccer. That's how I've always looked at it. It's a Legends League where European, champions of soccer players go to the MLS to cash in on a contract deal and just play counterattack soccer and cherry pick at the top. But recently it's kind of not been like that. But what are your thoughts, Michael? I mean, look, just hearing the percentages and the shots on goal, both had 4 shots on goal, but Nashville SC had 14, Atlanta United had 19. Like, that sounds a bit juiced. It's like baseballs, they're juiced. What does that sound like to you?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny you mentioned this, and I have experience coaching on the women's side, and I see this a lot on the women's side, especially at the youth levels. The players are taught to use their athletic ability, and in many cases, it's counterattack type of soccer. We're going to play the ball long. You go get it because you're the better athlete. As sad as that sounds, I think that's been taught to our youth over the past several years. Now, I think that's changing. I do think you see a lot more international flavor, a lot more possession style soccer that is being taught. And thank goodness if you're a soccer fan, because possession style soccer is beautiful if it's played correctly. But I think that's where a lot of what I would call the counterattack, the long ball type of soccer comes from in the U.S. is that we've always depended on athletic ability as opposed to skill, per se. And like I said, that's changing. Don't get me wrong; that's definitely changing. But I do think that there is an influence still remaining from that type of teaching.
Yeah, and how would that kind of start transitioning to North American soccer? I mean, you kind of alluded to it already that it's kind of transitioning. People are saying more possession based. But what next step does MLS need to make if they want to have that type of style of soccer, possession based, where it, like you're alluding to, it is a beautiful sight to see?
Well, I think it's look at who their head coach is, Gary Smith. In English national.
Mm-hmm.
I really think a lot of these MLS teams probably will end up. If they're going to go to a possession type of soccer, you're probably looking at European coaches. Now, there are a lot of good young U.S. coaches who are actually in Europe, kind of learning the same type of, skills. So who's to say 5 years from now, some hotshot American comes back and is able to teach soccer the way, Jose Mourinho teaches it, or Jurgen Klopp.
Or good old Pep Guardiola.
Of course, and Pep. Pep is, I would kill for 5 minutes in the room with Pep. That he's incredible.
The way he constructs an offensive possession is unreal. Like it's almost like he treats his center backs as point guards to basketball and just does like a 3-man weave and just keeps passing it around and around and around. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, regardless of what happened at Real Madrid, let's put that out there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, let's forget about what happened. I think Real Madrid is just a different breed. I think the team realized it was Carlo Ancelotti's last year coaching in club soccer. So now, and carrying on, we're talking about coaches here and mentioning Gary Smith. He won the MLS Cup in 2010. And he has some of the same guys on staff from that 2010 year with the 2022 Nashville SC club. Now, what are your thoughts about Nashville SC since they've been in the MLS? Because we've talked about how Gary Smith has that pedigree of winning a championship, but it's almost like he's come so close and then it kind of stops. Like they've been to the Western Conference Finals, I believe twice, if I'm not mistaken, and then they can't seem to get past that. Now, it's almost the same case as we transition over to hockey as well with the Predators. You have Barry Trotz for the longest time, could never seem to get out of the second round. Then you transition to Peter Laviolette. That gets you to the Stanley Cup Finals. Then you transfer over to John Hynes, and John Hynes he's all about development of the players, and they are developing well. But after this season, what is the next step the Preds need to make in regards to all of this?
Yeah, it's funny. That's a really good transition, actually, because I think both organizations kind of deal with the same issues. The teams being expansion teams, of course, are not going to start with the best talent, and that's kind of where Nashville is. Nashville's actually the soccer team, Nashville SC. I actually think they're probably a little ahead of schedule as far as talent goes for being just a couple of years old. If you look at the Predators have way more issues right now than Nashville SC, okay? It's kind of funny. Daryl Sutter, who coaches Calgary, the other night, and this was a couple weeks ago, he basically said out loud that, whoever the wild card team is that plays Colorado is basically just going to waste 8 days of their time. And, he nailed that on the head. Preds were really never very competitive. I guess game 2 they took it to overtime, but generally speaking, even in game 2 they were outshot. I think basically a 2-1 margin. The Preds right now are they're kind of in a hole, and I'm gonna explain kind of what I think happens with the Preds. Okay, for years the Preds have always relied on goaltending and defending. Okay, we've never really had that Nathan McKinnon type of center, that goal scorer. If you look back through the years at what the Preds dealt with, they had Pekka Rinne all the way from 2008 to 2019. That's 11 years of all-star quality goaltending. Okay, Then Saros comes in, and Saros plays really well, but he gets hurt. Two games before the end of the season, and then on top of that, if you look at defending, look at the defenders we've had: Roman Josi, Shea Weber, Kimo Tiemann, and Ryan Suter. The list goes on and on. Trotz really developed the defenders well. But Nashville has never had a true number one center forward to score 80 goals a season or whatever. They've never had it. They brought in Philip Forsberg to fill that role, okay? The Preds don't have it. We don't have that production out of our first center forward. And you look at this year, we actually had 2 40-goal scorers in Forsberg and Matt Duchene.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, where was the offense coming from? To me, it goes back to David Poile, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He wants to run an organization that is balanced on the book sheets, that's competitive enough to make the playoffs, all right? But I don't ever see him putting the money out there to actually get the players we need to win it, okay? I think us getting to the Stanley Cup 3 or 4 years ago with Laviolette was kind of an enigma, to be honest with you. You had Pekka Rinne, who absolutely caught fire. And you had Josi back there, who was, I believe he was an all-star that year.
Mm-hmm.
So you had that wall on defense that Nashville's so used to. And when you have that, you might be able to get away with scoring, what I would call an average number of goals. But if you look at this year's team was, I'm going to use the word flat.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't Duchene, if it wasn't Forsberg, you weren't going to get goals this year. They just weren't there to be had. So that's kind of what I think's happened with the Preds. I think they're at a point now where it may be time to rebuild.
Really?
They may regret not selling Forsberg when they had the opportunity, because now he's going to be a restricted free agent. Do they want to pay him? Do they want to bring him back? I don't know. If you don't bring him back, he walks for free. So it's a tough spot for the Preds, but based on what I saw this year, I don't see it getting any better.
Okay, you make a lot of great points. We're going to, unwind all of those. But first, let's cut to a quick break, and we will get into the rest of that after we stop.
Sorry to interrupt the episode you're listening to, but I just want to take a quick second to talk about Anchor. If you don't know what Anchor is, it's a platform that helps you create your own podcast. It's really easy. All you have to do is create an account, press the red button, start talking about whatever you want to talk about, and then submit it. It'll go to multiple platforms, and the best part about all this, it's free. So go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now, I'll get you back to your episode.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Nick Frazier Podcast. After that quick break we had there, we were talking about the Preds, talking about possibly a rebuild. Michael made a lot of great points, and we're going to delve into that right now. So, Michael, you mentioned, possibly a rebuild for the Nashville Predators. David Poile, you made a good point there about him making sure the books are nice, even keel, nothing too out of the ordinary. Basically, he's putting a product out there on the ice good enough to compete, and that seems to be the case. And then that's it. He's just putting a product out there enough to where it'll please the fan base. And luckily, he got lucky. Hate to use the play on words there, but in 2017 got lucky about the Stanley Cup. So then now you make a good point about Forsberg. With him being a free agent, what does that mean for the future of the franchise? Does that mean he signs elsewhere, signs with the team? Because it kind of, the narrative kind of revolves around Philip Forsberg, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, the whole principle for keeping him was to get to the playoffs. And, how successful was that? We get to the playoffs and we get swept in 4, and we're not even competitive. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When you watch players like Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, we didn't have anybody who could skate with those guys. It looked like a practice session out there. It was kind of embarrassing. Mm-hmm. Now, does Colorado do that to every team they play? I don't think so. Obviously, if you're in the NHL, you're the top league of all of professional hockey. It shouldn't be that lopsided. It just shouldn't be.
Yeah, and elaborating on that comment there with the Preds and what they were not able to keep up with Colorado. Now, in comparison to this year's team, in comparison to the 2017 Stanley Cup run, because that's probably the closest thing to the pedigree of perfection for this franchise, is that season they had a bunch of different varieties of players, height, size, speed. Because the thought everybody keeps talking about that I've heard is Rocco Grimaldi. Where's Rocco Grimaldi? He's been playing with the Admirals for a good bit of time, but he scored 5 goals in one period for the Preds at one point. He was a focal point in a specific playoff run for him. And then when John Hynes came into play, it was almost that it was as if John Hynes did not like the short guys. It's like he wants to fit the narrative of the rest of the NHL, and that's big body, size defenseman styled forwards that can go the distance of a game. But that's the thing, is if you have a short, stocky guy, let's refer back to Steve Sullivan. Look at how short he was and how productive he was for the Preds after he came from the Blackhawks. It reminds me of that situation. So do you think he's missing out on half of NHL prospects by just categorizing a certain demographic?
Yeah, if that's what he's doing, he's definitely missing out. And to be honest with you, I think the Preds gave up on Peter Laviolette a little too early. That's just my true feelings on the issue. But if you look around the NHL, there's a lot of those 5'6", 5'7" guys that can absolutely fly. They bring speed to the table that some of these big guys don't. So, to characterize a player based on his structure, to me, that's ridiculous. If that's what he's doing, then obviously I don't think he's fit to be an NHL coach.
So now mentioning about the coaching aspect of it, Barry Trotz fired from his former team and now is a open market coach to some degree. There have been talks about him possibly going elsewhere to coach or to be in the front office aspect of things. Now, I do recall when he left Nashville, he wanted, there was that opportunity of working in the front office for the Preds, but didn't want to because he wanted to coach. And sure enough, he gets himself a Stanley Cup, and now a year or two removed from that Stanley Cup, winning season, he is a free man to do whatever he wants. And there's been the talks of, should Barry Trotz come back to the Preds and just kind of bring the Cinderella story back together type deal? What do you think that's a good idea, or should the Preds just, like you're saying, just blow it all up and reboot and sell possibly a few all-star players?
Well, I tell you what, if Trotz comes back to Nashville as the coach, he's probably going to feel like he did when he first walked into the organization, because to me, the talent level right now is not a whole lot higher than it was for the first 5 years the organization was around. I had season tickets for those first 5 years, and I'm going to tell you, they were a scrappy bunch of guys, but there was not a whole lot of talent out there. So I don't know. Trotzy might be the guy.
If Trotzy does come back and the Preds are still thinking about trying to re-sign Philip Forsberg, and Forsberg has alluded to verbally to media and so forth that he loves it here in Nashville. He wants to stay, but it's all up to the negotiations of it all. But if you think about it and really dissect it for what it's worth, didn't have a great playoff at all. Did not have a great series versus Colorado. Yes, he did have a 40-plus year goal-scoring season, but what else is there to offer? Do you think the Preds should possibly try and re-sign him on a team-friendly deal if possible, and then maybe later in next season or a season after, trade him away?
Well, I'll tell you what, let me give you his stats from the Colorado series.
All right.
He had 2 assists and 2 shots on goal. If you're number one center in the NHL going into a playoff series, and that's the only production you have, and your current contract pays you $8 million a year, and now you're up for a renewal. In most cases, renewal, you're going to ask for more. So to me, I would not re-sign him. That's just my opinion. But if the Preds are going to spend money like that, I say go out there and rebuild. Find some youth. Spread that money out.
So then if you're on the rebuild aspect of it all, do you think the Preds should possibly trade away Saros in the next year or two because of his injury-prone situation?
Now, Saros, I would not trade away because in the rebuild mode, you better have a heck of a goaltender.
Yeah.
To even compete. Because, here's what's you got to think about it from a business aspect. If the Preds start losing 3 out of every 4 games, as loyal as Predators fans are, you're going to start to see some of those games during the weeknights, go from 18,000 fans to 12,000 to 10,000 over time. So what you don't want to do is just completely abandon ship knowing you're going to be a bottom dweller. You still got to keep some weapons. I just think you have to measure, is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze, as they say?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's not in this case.
Okay, good to know. Well, I'm going to give you another scenario before we kind of move on to another topic you mentioned. Ryan Johansson, somebody who does play well in the playoffs, somebody who is pretty productive. His contract is $8 million, and that's kind of a bit of a cap hit. So what are your thoughts on possibly trading away Ryan Johansson to another team in the NHL and possibly trying to re-sign Forsberg? I know your stance on it is probably shouldn't re-sign Forsberg for what it's worth and so forth. And now that you kind of know that Matt Duchene is a 40-goal scorer, do you think there's a bit of optimism on that side as well? There's kind of 2 questions in there.
Yeah, there could be. I thought Duchene had a really nice season. He was probably one of the few bright spots, obviously. As far as Johansson goes, I would not trade him. Not at least what I would wait and do is kind of what they did this year. See what they look like going into the playoff situation, but before the trade deadline, if the Predators are dead in the water, then maybe that makes sense to trade them at that point because there will be teams out there looking to bolster their offense. There will be teams willing to pay a lot of money for him. I wouldn't do anything this summer. Let's put it that way. But that's kind of how I would play him.
So let me get this straight. This upcoming summer, the Nashville Predators do nothing in the offseason, let Philip Forsberg walk, invest in the youth, and possibly get a new coach. Am I on the right page with you?
That's what I would do. That'd be and that new coach really in theory could be Barry Trotz because he's been through this rebuild before. He knows Poyle very well. That could make sense to me.
Yeah.
Now I know your other listeners probably might be throwing stones at the radio or when they hear this, but to me that makes more sense because I'm not a believer in Hynes. Okay. What happened the second half of this season doesn't make sense to me. It's almost like the players lost belief in him. So something happened in that locker room to cause this season to tank the way it did.
Yeah, you make great points there as well. And that's one thing before we move on is that John Hynes, that from what I saw watching Preds games, he wasn't great at making middle-of-the-game decisions, like trying to help transition and offensive movement or some forth, if that makes sense. Like he wasn't able to make mid-game transitions and changes and so forth. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Carrying on here with the Nick Frazier Podcast, we're heading into the last segment of the show, and that is Meals with Meatball. Yes, yours truly, Meals with Meatball, where we talk about the best foods that have been had in the last couple weeks, Tennessee Tasties, Nashville Nasties. A lot of you may know Michael from a previous episode on the podcast where it was during the COVID lockdown. It was Lose the COVID-15 with Mike Parente, as it was titled. You can go back and listen to that one sometime on another term, but you can listen to this here and know that Michael is a big Cinco de Mayo fan for the restaurant here in the Nashville area. Always has a good a good menu to choose from, a good selection. So, Michael, recently, what have been the good foods that you've had at the house?
Well, I tell you, there's been quite a variety of food that has come through my house recently. Chicken enchiladas, homemade chicken enchiladas. We had a young lady fix us a whole pan of these homemade chicken enchiladas, and they were fabulous. I'm not going to lie, just delicious. And then, of course, here in East Tennessee, where I live, there's a few really nice restaurants with some unique foods. We have one that's called El Jeanette, which is a Mexican restaurant here. And I'm a huge fan of their tacos mexicanos, which is basically your classic Mexican taco with steak and chorizo, little lime and cilantro and onions. And then, of course, little tomatillo sauce to dip in. So that's probably my favorite here around town right now.
Man, that sounds good. Now, what are some bad experiences you've had in recent weeks with some food?
Well, I'm not a big comfort food fan, shall we say. And we had someone fix some homemade chicken and dumplings with green beans, and the dumplings weren't up to my standards, just to be honest. I do like chicken and dumplings certain ways, but in this case, it didn't meet my standards. So I know that's being a little picky, but
that's okay. That's the whole point of Meals on Meatball. You have your Tennessee Tasties, Nashville Nasties. Not necessarily a Nashville Nasty, not necessarily a nasty either, but just not on the bright side of the Tasties aspect of it all. Well,
so what about on your side of things? Obviously, being in Nashville, you have way more selection than I do. Any thing new and exciting over there you've tried?
Well, it's interesting here because I as I go to work every other day, I've been talking with a few people, and for the podcast in this aspect of it, I'm going to be doing some donut reviews, some cheeseburger reviews, and some hot chicken reviews. So everybody knows the slogan of the Nick Frazier Podcast: country music, hot chicken, Nashville living. And there's going to be some hot chicken reviews. And everybody knows, I've mentioned it before on the podcast, I'm a big burger guy. So I have a list of burgers that is yet to be published on the Nick Frazier Podcast and on the podcast Instagram page. So those will be out soon. But in regards to what I've had recently, I've been doing the go-to Cinco de Mayo.
Hard to lose with Cinco de Mayo, honestly.
Exactly, and you get the tortillas on the side with the pollo enquisado. I mean, how do you not mess that up? But as for some stuff I've been really craving recently, there is a new place. I will say, when you come into town, Michael, eventually in the coming months, we will go to this place. It's called the Smoking Oasis. It's a family friend of mine. I went to high school with this guy, Bringle. His dad is the peg leg porker, Mr. Kerry Bringle, and he opened up a new smoke shop out in the Nations, and they have a smoked pastrami, Michael. I'll tell you right now. I have a friend of mine, Landon, who's been on the podcast before. We agree to this the way we say it. It melts in your mouth. I swear to you, the pastrami melts in your mouth. It's a taste like no other. And it kind of how you mentioned, like, Southern comfort food. It's not really Southern comfort food. It's a good brisket style. But also for dessert, they have banana pudding. And, I'm a big sucker for banana pudding.
Well, that sounds pretty tasty. Sign me up. I'm ready.
Yeah, they really do have some good selections there. They have that Alabama white sauce you can put on your brisket. And they got sausage there. They had the cornbread and the green beans, but I'm not a big cornbread guy. I don't know why. Not a big cornbread guy. Green beans I'll eat every now and then.
So is the cornbread the sweet kind or the not sweet kind?
I believe it was the sweet kind. I can dig with the sweet kind, but like the non-sweet kind, to me, like cornbread, I don't know if it's a texture thing, but it's grainy, very grainy and tough. It's like I'm chewing on sawdust. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I mean, do you have anything else you'd like to tell the listeners before we send it off for this episode of the Nick Frazier Podcast?
I just appreciate you having me on, and I don't want to let cat out of the bag, so to speak, just yet, but be looking forward to some other projects involving both of us.
Indeed.
Hopefully that we get off the ground here soon and have a little fun with.
Oh, I definitely agree with you there, Michael. And for all the listeners out there for the Nick Frazier Podcast, my uncle will be joining me on a lot of podcasts in the near future. We've both, come into some open time and we are able to help give out some great insight on the local Tennessee, aspect of sports. So, Michael, I appreciate you joining the Nick Frazier Podcast. You're always welcome anytime. And any last words?
No, sir, I had a blast. I appreciate being on the show. I enjoy it. I look forward to feedback, good or bad. I have thick skin, so if people disagree with my opinions, no big deal. That's kind of what we're here to do, is generate a little bit of talk. And I say, bring it on. I enjoy it.
I love it. Bring it on, baby. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the Nick Frazier Podcast. If you want to find out any information in between episodes, you know where to go. Go to Instagram, type in the Nick Frazier Podcast, click the follow button, and when you click the follow button, share with a few friends or family. Make sure you help grow the podcast as much as possible. A lot of people enjoy it. I enjoy it. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.